Well, good afternoon, or good morning, or good night, or just good day, everybody in the world. This is a very exciting afternoon for all of us, I'm quite sure. And wherever you may be, I welcome you to the second of the COVID-19 defying virtual meetings, which I will sure you will all enjoy. Now, this morning, I was extremely pleased to receive 1.8 kilos of Crawford's custard creams by Amazon, of course, and therefore everything's going very well here for the next week or so. If anyone would like to share, then of course that may be arranged sometime in the future. Now, we normally have a fire drill about this time, so any of you who have not checked your smoke alarms in the last few weeks, I do suggest you do so, but not yet, when it's all over. The registered number, which we also announce at this time, at the moment is 211 from 26 countries. This is definitely a record for a virtual meeting. After all, we only had one last, and that one was limited to 100. So we've already exceeded our last meeting by 2 times. Congratulations, everybody. And I'm quite sure that with 26 countries participating, we've probably broken all records of that one as well. Now, at the end of this talk, there's going to be a question and answer session. But I would ask you, please, not to wait until that time. But if you wish to ask a question, go to the bottom of your screen where there's a little orange icon which says chat. And if you put your question on there, you can put it on at any time during the presentation. Then our inimitable IT manager and his colleague will sort questions out, and we'll have them towards the end. Now, our president, Richard Stock, has had a roller coaster year. A brand new headquarters, an opening by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, a stunning 150th show in Stockholm, and instead of a major international show, a pandemic. Now, I'm rather sure he would not wish to have the latter, and nor would any of our members, both local and overseas. But those of us who were planning to be here today to exhibit at London 2020 or at the Royal's meeting for regional reps will be delighted that our president has come to show us Sudan in the De La Rue years, which it is the only member to ever have won the Lee Medal twice, both of which were for Sudanese displays, and he's won gold medals both internationally and at home for this wonderful material. Richard, the floor is yours.
It will be once I unmute you, Richard, or if you'd like to unmute yourself, of course.
Well, wait a moment. I'm having...
You are unmuted. That's great.
I've got a slight problem. Wait a minute. No, I'm back to this now. Share screen, yes?
Yes.
And I want to go onto the PowerPoint display, yes?
Yes.
And share in the bottom right-hand
Yes,
corner.
we can see it. And at the moment, you now need to do the thing you did before. Set up slideshow.
Right.
Yeah, go on. Option 2, that's fine.
I've
okay.
done that.
Yeah.
From the beginning.
From the beginning.
Okay.
Perfect. And the other thing let me just have a look at that. Yeah, that's fine. We can all see it nice and clear. Well, I can only speak for myself. I am hopeful that all of our friends around the world can see it as well. You're certainly sharing it with us. So
right.
Over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be, fellow members and guests. Welcome to Sudan, the De La Rue years, 1897 to 1991. This is inevitably a very high level display featuring items from the De La Rue archives and the De La Rue collection. And our story begins in the early summer of 1897 when Edward Alexander Stanton, an officer in the Oxfordshire Light Infantry, was serving with the Nile expedition of 1896-98. And part of his duties were to prepare military maps, and in order to make them more interesting, he included illustrations of wells, oases, ruined temples, and rock formations. Now, his work came to the attention of Sir Herbert Kitchener, the commander-in-chief of the expedition, who had already decided that the Sudan should have its own stamps on becoming an independent postal authority. Kitchener had already rejected a design by an accomplished artist, partly because the design featured a temple at Abu Simbel, which of course is in Egypt and not in the Sudan. But the artist had also annotated his drawing with the words, "My fee for this work is 25 guineas. Kitchener had put a question mark against that statement, sent for his ADC, Major Jimmy Watson, who was a close personal friend of Stanton's, and said, let's see what Stanton can do. A meeting was arranged at Korti on the Nile, and it went something like this. Kitchener, I want you to design a stamp for the Sudan. It's not to bear my portrait or that of anyone else, and you are to go on producing designs until you come up with something of which I approve. I'll be back in a week. Good morning." Stanton was nervous, to say the least, and he had no wish to be shot at dawn, as his brother officers had kindly indicated his fate would be if he failed to produce what Kitchener wanted. He therefore spent a somewhat anxious 36 hours. The following day, the mail arrived by camel rider instead of the usual post boat. And he had also seen an advertisement in the Illustrated London News for Treloar's carpets, and it depicted a camel with carpets strapped to either side of the saddle. That gave Stanton an idea, and he persuaded a sheikh of the local Hawaria tribe to dress up in his war kit, get onto his camel, and ride to and fro in front of Stanton whilst the latter made a series of sketches. Kitchener returned and saw the designs. Stanton wasn't present at the time and approved them. And on the 6th of June, 1897, he sent or signed the letter displayed, addressed to Messrs. Delarue and Company in London, setting out his requirements for a set of stamps, the denominations, and asking also for designs to be forwarded. The letter included the design that was eventually accepted, and the original of this, signed E.A. Stanton, I understand, is now in the museum in Khartoum. Also included with the letter was a series of additional sketches which Stanton had made. His principal duties were not designing stamps or indeed annotating maps. So he had with him in the Sudan a box of paints, some foolscap paper, and some pencils, and he couldn't pop into the local art shop in Korti or Berber to buy the other materials that would have better served the attempts that he made to design the camel postman stamp. These are merely photographs of those additional sketches, and the originals were returned to the Sudan at the request of the Governor-General in 1927. Delarue responded with this Sudan postage colour scheme, and this represents all 2 million denominations, but they are the colours of the issued stamps. And adjacent are 2 progressive die proofs which illustrate the lengths to which the company went to develop the designs that were submitted to them for the very high quality postage stamps which they issued subsequently. The financial secretary in Khartoum, in Cairo, said that he thought that some of the duties, that is the denominations of stamps, might be confused because certain colours were rather close. And subsequently, Delarue did produce more colour trials. Now, the appendix sheet that's on the right of your screen, labelled B, and which features 20 colour trials numbered 1 to 20, is the only remaining complete sheet of colour trials from the 1898 series out of the 4, and De La Rue always produced about 36 colour trials on 2 sheets, so there were two sets of colour trials. This one first surfaced in the 1930s with the items on the left of the screen, which consist of colour trials numbered 29 to 36, which were cut from the second appendix sheet, and 8 singles. Now, the other sheet would have had 16 on it. A second pair of appendix sheets appeared in auction in November 1977 and came from the Colonel Hebert collection. They were both complete. When they reappeared in 1986, they had been cut up. And I remember the collector who owned them telling me that he cut them up because they didn't fit his album pages. That illustrates one of the disadvantages of archival material coming onto the market, because large items are sometimes cut up by collectors and dealers for a variety of reasons. Or the other disadvantage is, or one of the other disadvantages is that sometimes they're kept in very unsuitable circumstances. Just a few usages then of the first issue Camel postman stamps. Shortly after the Battle of Accra in early April 1898, a bag of mail from the 1st British Brigade ended up in the Nile. The mail was retrieved, and all the items that have since come on the market bearing the cachet wet through collision on the Nile. This incident has been investigated or researched by several collectors, but it's probably too insignificant, given everything else that was going on at the time, to have been recorded. But all of these 16 covers that have been recorded come from the first soldiers in the 1st British Brigade, so they're the Royal Warwicks, the Lincolns, the Seaforths, or the Cameron Highlanders. Another pair of usages, I don't know why they had a post office at Wad Ramley. It was fairly remote, but it was probably part of the route over which the army travelled during 1898 and 1899. And that is the only recorded example of a large star and crescent postmark on cover. There are 3 or 4 examples known on single stamps. The other item is interesting because instead of going across country from Suakin to Angola, it was sent across to Berber and then up to Lisbon and then down to West Africa by a very circuitous route, probably because there was no overland route in place at the time. This last usage I'm showing from the first issue demonstrates that shortages of stamps were encountered fairly early on. In 1903, the Sudan post offices ran short of 5mm stamps, and they decided to overprint locally the 5 piastres with the words and figure 5 millimes. They were done overprinted in panes of 30, and 200 panes were recorded as being overprinted. But inevitably, 6 panes went through the overprinting form upside down. And this, although it's a contrived front, it must have been a cover at one time, but it's just a front now. It's addressed to Monsieur Leone Colucci, and Colucci covers are quite well known. It has the largest recorded used multiple of the inverted overprint, a strip of 4, a single, and then there's 2 additional stamps with the overprint the right way up. In 1902, there had been complaints about the watermark used for the first issue, said to resemble a cross, and the postal authorities decided to ask for it to be changed to the Egyptian star and crescent. That was agreed, but the new stamps were not, the second issue were not put on sale until all the stocks of first issue stamps had been exhausted, and that did take a number of years due to the less few usage of some of the denominations. Now in 1906, it was agreed and De La Rue were asked to prepare designs for a 4 mm stamp to meet the postcard rate. And the one chosen is the one that I've got the cursor on now in the center of the sheet on the left. We'll see another example of that sheet in a moment or two in different circumstances. However, that color only lasted some 10 months because they decided then to implement the UPU regulation, which indicated that the postcard rate should consist of a stamp, the color of which was predominantly red. And the one in the sheet on the right, it's the item at the top that was chosen. The third Camel Postman issue consisted of a decision to reduce the size of the millim value stamps to that of the size of the King George V stamp that was currently in use in the UK and in many other territories. That decision was taken in 1915, and a number of essays were produced. There's 3 similar to the one illustrated on the left there. And a further decision was taken not to put into practice the decision until the cessation of hostilities from the First World War. In 1921, they looked again at another copy of the appendix sheet used for the first postcard stamp in 1906. And you can see the 2 stamps that are circled, which is a selection of 2 of the color combinations to be used for the reduced size millim stamps. This appendix sheet has been damaged because someone at some stage has torn off the date of April 1906, which was in the top right-hand corner above the word appendix. I have seen an earlier photograph of this in an auction catalogue with that date complete. Further items then for the third Camel Postman issue, a combination die proof. I think it's quite unusual to have both the duty and the key plate on engraved on the same piece, and this is very much an exception item. The block of 4 stamps is a previously unrecorded essay that surfaced, I think, in the late 1980s, and then below it are 2 blocks, one which comprise a series of 5 which were found in the early 1990s, and they are on unwatermarked gummed paper. They're probably plate proofs, but no record has been found as to their provenance. With the third Camel Postman issue, the company decided that they would provide samples for their representatives in their attempts to secure business for De La Rue, and these were used purely as a marketing initiative. So they're all perforated stamps in unissued colours and overprinted specimen, and they were stuck onto dark cards and issued to their representatives in their attempts to obtain business. 1927, the watermark was again changed to the letters SG representing Sudan government, and there are 10 piastre colour trials in existence. I think they were in large blocks or sheets, and they've since been cut up. They're quite common. There's about a dozen in the 10 piastre denomination and another 4 in the 20 piastre denomination. And it was just to test what combinations of colours might be suitable for the issued stamps. The same range of values was included in the 1927 issue. They were printed on chalk surface paper, but De La Rue had a problem a bit later on, and we'll come to that in due course. And to move on now, in 1931, it was suggested that a pictorial set of stamps should be issued to replace the Camel Postman design. And these designs here, plus another one representing a dhow on the Nile, were produced. They were given to the Governor General for consideration, Sir John Maffey, and he rejected them out of hand. And the reason for his rejection was that they departed so significantly from the camel postman design, which was so significant as representing the Sudan Postal Service. In 1931, 3 of the camel postman stamps were overprinted Airmail and were used for airmail purposes during the pioneering flights through Egypt, Sudan, Kenya, and down to South Africa. And when it became clear that a permanent route would be established, it was decided to have a separate series of airmail stamps. And the design chosen was from a photograph of the statue of General Gordon in Khartoum. Now that statue is no longer in Khartoum. After independence in 1956, it was moved to Surrey, and it now stands in the grounds of the Gordon School at Woking. But it's one of the very popular designs produced for the Sudan, and there's some proofs and colour trials there. This is just scratching the surface of the Gordon statue airmails. It's a subject in itself, it's quite complex. The stamps were overprinted on several occasions. Additional denominations were added to the series, and of course the perforation gauge was changed. So it's a series in itself, and there's a lot more essays and proofs and trials available for those who wish to study them. 1935, we saw the commemorative issue to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the death of General Gordon. A series of 9 stamps, all recess printed, some die proofs and colour trials there. 4 stamps, the Millim values were of General Gordon, and then there were 3 stamps featuring the Gordon Memorial College, and 2 stamps, the 20 piastre and the 50 piastre, which represented the memorial service in 1898. The 2 die proofs here in the center right and lower right are more unusual than most die proofs, simply because die proofs are generally on card. These are on gummed, watermarked paper, and I think that's exceptional as far as the issue of die proofs are concerned. There's 2 sets have been recorded as existing in that condition. In 1940, Delarue's premises were bombed, and this photograph illustrates quite clearly the problems that Delarue encountered in providing not only regular quantities of stamps, but also to the appropriate standard. Chalk surface paper was in very short supply or not obtainable at times. And certainly as far as the Sudanese camel postman issues are concerned, Delarue had to print them on ordinary paper instead of chalk surface paper. So there's almost a separate series that was issued during wartime. Shortages occurred and local overprinting took place. This one was the first item, the 5mm on 10mm provisional issue. It was done locally by McCorkadale Limited, and to be quite blunt about it, they made a mess of the job. A large quantity of stamps had to be destroyed. There were numerous varieties, and one can be shown here in the Arabic character in the center. The bar, the upright bar in that Arabic character is missing. There's about 4 or 5 of these varieties that are listed in Gibbon's catalogue, but they had a particular problem with the letter 5, with the figure 5. On one of the panes of stamps that was overprinted, the 5 broke down completely at one position on the sheet, and rather than destroy more stamps, they decided to improvise. And one can imagine somebody scratching about in a box of odd type, looking for a 5 that resembled the Gloucester bold 5 that was used on the rest of the printing, fitting it into a wooden handle, and then sitting there with the sheets of stamps and at that particular position on the sheet with an inky pad hand stamping all the 5s in place. The problem with that is that no 2 inserted 5s are in exactly the same position. So you just need 1 copy of the variety there. Other shortages occurred with also a 4.5 piastre denomination. They introduced a forces airmail rate to England, and of course there was no 4.5 piastre denomination, so they overprinted the 8 piastres to start with. And again, the overprinting in that case wasn't done to a particularly high standard. The 4.5 piastres on 5 millimes was of a much higher standard. No varieties have been recorded. Blocks of the 4.5 on 8 piastres are scarce because most of them were sold as singles. But the other overprint, the 5 on the 5 millimes, was more risky because the overprinting, in fact, increased the face value of the stamps by a factor, each stamp by a factor of 9, which is a bit of an invitation to forgers. They were both forged. There are inverted surcharges which are readily identifiable. Shortages continued, so a bold decision was taken to have a completely new series of stamps for the duration, and the government security press in Nasik in India provided the well-known palm trees issue. In 1948, there was a further issue of camel postman stamps, and this consisted solely of modifying the inscription below the camel, and that was on all values within the set. And there was a new denomination added, that the top value was increased from 20 to 50 piastres. The 50 piastre was overprinted locally with the words "new issue" and used for publicity purposes. And then again in the 1990s, blocks and sometimes occasionally sheets of stamps began to appear on the market where they had been overprinted school and punctured. And these were, it was discovered, were used for by the Post and Telegraph's training school at Omdurman. The school stamps also appear on the 1951 Pictorial issue, which we'll come to in a few moments. 1948 also saw 2 commemorative stamps. Firstly, the stamp Jubilee commemorative single stamp, and the essay, hand-painted essay on the extreme left, represents the colours that were used on the issued stamps. The item on the far right was the an essay for the 10 millime of the Legislative Assembly stamp issued in December 1948. The other value was a 5 piastre denomination. And these are all the 3 are ex the De La Rue archives. 1950 also saw the replacement of the Gordon statue airmail stamps by a completely new series of 8 pictorial adhesives. I've just picked one to show the development process of this issue. Firstly, there's an essay at the lower right of artist notes, sketch, and then the essay itself, which was rejected. And then moving over to the left, a 7 piastre denomination, and the Sudan never issued a 7 piastre denomination. So why that essay was produced with quite that figure on it, I don't know. But you can see the ink note at the side there that it should be the 20 piastre. It was accepted, and the key and duty die proofs forming part of the series of 16 with 2 for each value is shown below. 1951 saw the issue of a pictorial series, 17 stamps, and the flip book, which is on the Royal's website, shows my collection on 32, or half of my collection on 32 pages of this particular issue, with a lot of the items that were in the De La Rue collection. The Delarue collection had, and that's also on the Royal website, had 57 items, but it didn't include the finished die proofs, which would add another 34 to it. So because 17 values, there's 2 per value. So it gives you a total of 34, 1 for each of the key plates and the duty plates. The ibex design was one that was carried forward from the 1931 rejects by Sir John Maffey, and the Delarue collection contained a range of photographs, essays, sketches, hand-painted essays, and I'm showing one here of the shoe bill, which is just happens to be a particular favourite of mine. The shoe bill has got a massive beak, and ornithologists have described this not as a bill or beak, but as a feeding apparatus. And it has a rather vicious looking hook at the end. One can imagine what that was used for by that particular bird. There's also a postcard in existence of one of these that was the pet of Lady Wingate, Sir Francis Reginald Wingate, who was one of the Governor Generals and a senior officer in Kitchener's staff. There's a postcard of her patting one of these on the head. So some of them must have been fairly tame at some stage. Right, a few essays here, rejected essays. The 4 on the right are hand-painted of scenes in the Sudan. They're all considered and then rejected. The 3.5 piastre one, which depicts palm trees, is one that was missing from my collection until I saw it as the lead item in a thematic collection on palm trees. I was unsuccessful in bidding for it, but I then managed to obtain it from the dealer who bought the collection. It was in fact the only item in the collection that I needed. The vignette die proof, this is just an example of, there's a story behind this, but there isn't time to tell it now. It's just an example of one of the key plate die proofs that you can find throughout the whole series, and a hand-painted essay of the completed design for the 3 piastre stamp. The camel postman design was retained for the 50 piastre denomination. This isn't the exact design that was used, it's one similar. It's hand-painted and it's attached to the artist's original sketch with his notes on it and detail of the border and the denomination. 1954 saw self-government for the Sudan. It was not entirely clear whether this would take place in 1953 or in 1954. 3 stamps were issued, and it was decided by the authorities to print stamps dated both 1953 and 1954. Eventually, with self-government, they were all issued to the post offices. With self-government coming in 1954, instructions were issued to issue only the 1954 stamps. However, the inevitable happened, and a few post offices issued those dated 1953. Officials from the postal authorities scurried round, collected up most of them, and they were destroyed. But they hadn't bargained on what took place in Britain. There was a stamp exhibition in London, and it was suddenly discovered that dealers were selling the stamps dated 1953. After inquiries, it was found out that they had bought them direct from the Sudan agents in London, who were either unaware or hadn't realized the implications of selling them. And the dealers were subsequently approached and told, well, if you would like to hand in the remainder of your stock dated 1953, we will exchange them for those dated 1954, which should have been issued. We've not been told how many dealers accepted the offer. The 1962 pictorial issue followed and lasted until 1991, and that was another pictorial issue, but the camel postman design was again used for the top value in the set. And there's a couple of proof items there, overprinted for official purposes in Arabic and used by government departments. One for the camel postman there, and another one of part of the Pictorial series. The 62 Pictorials issued did contain 1 or 2 errors and varieties. There's a plate proof here of the 15 millim, a block of 4 with the colour orange omitted, and then the only recorded example of the double official overprint. This is a used copy. There must have been others in existence that were used, but I suspect if they weren't picked out at the time, then most of the envelopes with the stamp on them went into the waste paper basket. So that's the only one that's known. To go back a bit, postage due labels were issued in 1898, and Stanton, who designed the camel postman, had the job of preparing a design for the postage due, and he used the gunboat design. And that endured for a long period of time, right up until the 1970s. Now, there was a lot of discussion about the inscription above the vignette. And this one here is inscribed Sudan postage. That wasn't what was requested. They wanted Sudan postage tax. And that appeared on the frame die proof eventually. The other 2 that were rejected were Sudan revenue and Sudan tax stamp, both of which appeared on these photographic essays. Military telegraph stamps were also issued. And this is the famous camel train stamp. They were perforated down the middle so that part of it went on to the telegram form and the other part formed was in effect a receipt. And there are 2 essays here, one for the vernaculars and the other for the completed stamp of denomination of 5 millimes. Appendix sheets were also produced for these, and there's a little bit more of a story, and we're back to philatelic vandalism. These 2 sheets were part of the Delarue collection, and they no longer exist in this form. We have established in the Sudan study group that they were cut up, they were bought by a dealer and cut up. This is one that I have, and you can see that it is the stamp that's in position 7 on this left-hand sheet, because there's a nick in part of the design on the right-hand side, and it is identical there. We know that the top of this sheet was cut up because it's in the collection of another member of the Sudan study group, but the others were cut up in strips of horizontal strips of 3. But I think there's been further cutting up so that they are produced as, some of them are produced as singles. However, all is not lost, because in 2016, the other pair of sheets suddenly surfaced where they hadn't been seen since 1977. And they were obtained by a member of the Sudan study group. 1991, and we're getting towards the end of our story now. 1991, the camel postman design was again retained by Delarue for the top value in the series. And this block is perforated TDLR specimen. So we know it's come from a later release of archival material by Delarue. Now, to complete the story, I go back to 1898. I mentioned that Stanton wasn't present when Kitchener agreed to use the camel postman design for the stamps. And the first that Stanton heard about the success of his design was when the stamps were issued in March of 1898. And he went to Jimmy Watson and asked if he could have a set of the stamps on a sheet of paper signed by Kitchener to the effect that he designed them. And although he was asked to pay for the stamps, he was never invoiced for them. The story may be apocryphal. It may have been a joke between 2 friends. But in 1998, the Sudan Study Group held a weekend conference in a hotel in Kettering. And in the room, we had a descendant of Stanton with the original of this document. That is one of many photocopies that were made on that day with the kindly consent of the hotel. It was the most photocopied item that day. And it was a memorable occasion. So you will see there that the colour of the stamps is faded, or is faded. And that was because it was framed and hung in a bathroom, and the atmospheric conditions did what they should have done to De La Rue's fugitive printing inks that they used. So if you have any items like that, it's best not to frame it and hang it on the wall, let alone in the bathroom, and particularly not in sunlight, because they won't last very long. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed the Camel Postman and other De La Rue items from their archive. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Fellows and members, I don't think you can get the hump about that.
Oh.
I thought that was a most excellent presentation. Thank you very much indeed, Richard. Fantastic material and beautifully presented and very finely delivered. Thank you. Now it's time for questions. And as I said before, questions should be please delivered through the chat box at the bottom of your screen. And Mark, over to you to forward them on to our president.
Thank you very much, Peter and Richard. May I add my congratulations to an excellent presentation. Thank you very much. Right.
Thank you.
The first point that has been made is actually from our dear friend, Mr. Marcellis. Patrick says, just to let us all know, you mentioned that cache wet through collision on the Nile. He says it's also known on Belgian mail that came from the Lado enclave. So that was more or less contemporary, wasn't it? It was. Am I right? Yeah, sort of time-wise. Patrick, do you want to just comment on that?
Yes, Sir Richard. It's from the same period, and
Yes.
apparently one small bag of mail from Lado was also ended up on the bottom of the Nile.
Ah, right. It had a dual purpose then.
Yes.
All
But,
right.
congratulations for your splendid presentation, by the way.
Thank you very much indeed, Patrick. I much appreciate your comments.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay. So, has anyone actually got any questions for our president? Because I'm not seeing a great deal at the moment in the chat box. So, as sometimes happens when we have physical meetings, as you know, we say that the presenter says, "Okay, I'm ready for questions," and then nobody asks any questions. You've obviously stunned them all into silence, as it were, Richard.
I should have concluded with the recipe for camel stew.
Maybe, yeah. But that took, I think.
That'll be for another time.
Yeah, but that was enough to feed 3,800 people. So yeah.
Yes, but if that's not enough, you add 2 rabbits. You see.
Yeah, indeed. Now we have actually got a question.
Good.
Nothing to do with rabbits. Sean Dale, who is over in America, Sean says, what are the best references for these particular issues, Richard, for these, like for the Camel Post issue and so on?
The Camel Post, the most up-to-date booklet is the one that I produced in 2002 on the Camel Postman issues exclusively. There have been a few additional pieces of information that have surfaced since then, but that really takes over from Gisborne and Thompson, the 1948 publication, and also the book produced by Major Stagg in the 1970s. One of the things that I would like to do in the future is to put together a book that deals not only with the camel postman, but with the other issues as well, because we are a bit overdue in having something that's more comprehensive, I think, over all the Sudan issues.
Yeah.
The camel postman is the only one that I've had a chance to really study in the depth that I wanted to, because of other things that might work.
Yeah. Actually, just on the subject of study, I think it might be worth mentioning, of course, that you are the past president of the Sudan Study Group. Would you like to maybe just speak a little bit about that, about the Sudan Study Group, given that indeed that group studies these stamps?
Yes, the Sudan Study Group was founded in 1977. And it's not just the stamps, it's the postal history and ephemera, anything to do with philately and related subjects of the Sudan. We have about 85 members now. We've lost quite a lot of our long-standing members, and we hold usually 2 meetings a year. I edit the journal, which is published twice a year, called the Camel Post, would you believe? We're always looking for members who are interested in the issues of Sudan or the postal history. There's a very wide number of subjects, because of course at one time, before the partition into the creation of the Republic of South Sudan, it was the largest country in Africa. So yes, and I think our secretary has joined us this afternoon. Yes, she has joined us this afternoon, Julie Anderson. We had, of course, because of the coronavirus pandemic, we had to cancel our joint meeting with the Egypt Study Circle, weekend meeting, which is scheduled for the beginning of April, and I'm hoping that I'll have the chance to reschedule that possibly at the same time next year.
Yes, that'd be good. Yeah, in fact, you mentioned Julie, and welcome, Julie. Thank you for joining us. Julie asked the question, Richard, do you know which gunboat was represented on the gunboat stamp?
I do, but I can't remember the name. Might be.
All right. Fair enough.
I do. I'll have to look at that separately.
Perhaps I could say something there. There is a gunboat parked in a concrete block by the side of the Nile in Khartoum. And I have a very nice photograph of myself and my wife standing on it back in the 1980s. I can't show it to you today, but I'm sure I can show it to friends later on.
That gunboat is the Malik.
The Malik, yes.
Malik.
Julie's
and I think
well,
that may be that. I think that may be the one that's on the postage due stamp as well.
Yeah. Good.
Because there is a society that specialises in looking after that gunboat it's called the Malik Society, and they did a presentation at the Sudan Study Group weekend, probably about 10 or 12 years ago.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you. Right, moving on to some other questions, because the good news is that we now have a small queue of questions for you, Richard. An obvious one from Joan Harmer. Joan asks, why did you start collecting this area?
I started in the late 1970s because I had decided to give up collecting Great Britain. I looked in Gibbon's catalogue and I saw that SG1 was priced at under £1. And I thought, well, this looks like a country that's worth collecting. I liked the camel postman stamps. I've always been interested in late Victorian history, and it just looked fascinating. Once I started, I was hooked.
Right, that's a very good reason. Alan asks, why was it necessary to have multiple goes at the color combinations? You know that there were all those different color combinations. Yes. Yeah, so the question is, why was it necessary to have multiple goes at the color combinations?
I think that Delarue, well, there's two things here. Firstly, with Sudan in particular, that the financial secretary said that some of the duties might be confused because the colors to him looked rather close. I don't necessarily share that opinion, but it was the practice of De La Rue as well, I think, to produce quite a large number of colour combinations that could then be chosen by the postal authorities in the territory concerned. And then a certain amount of negotiation took place. I mean, some of the colour combinations looked outrageous and would never really have been suitable for postage stamps because clearly they weren't durable enough.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that was the reasoning behind it. They wanted to give people choice. And I think most territories at that time would choose colours that weren't too bright or where the contrast was too great. If you have bright yellow and bright blue, it doesn't look particularly attractive. I think that's partly the reason for it.
Okay. Now, there was another question. Let me just bring it back up again. Took my eye off it for a second. Yeah, Brian Livingston is making a point about the Gordon commemorative. Yeah, the large format stamp.
Mm-hmm.
He said, is everyone aware that the engraver's name is on the palm tree in the background of that stamp? Did you know that?
Yes, I did.
Okay, that's good.
He's reminded me of.
Yes, he has, hasn't he? He's reminded us.
I'd forgotten all about
Yes.
that. I remember noticing that some time ago, but I've forgotten about it.
But that's a really good point that Brian's
made.
It
is a good point to make, yes.
That the engraver's name was put on the palm tree. Yeah, that's where he put it. Oh, sorry, that's where it was put. Yes. Keith Burton would like to know how many of the first issues were produced.
Ooh. I can't remember offhand. The numbers are printed in the monograph I did in 2002.
Okay.
But they were certainly sufficient because the only one that didn't that ran out was the 5mm, which was the standard letter rate.
Yeah.
And that was the one that was overprinted in 1903. You see, the decision in 1902 to change the watermark, they said, well, we're not going to throw all these first issue stamps away with the rosette watermark. And some of them were still being used up in 1906, 1907.
Yep. Okay. On the subject of the gunboat, apparently Gibbons says that the gunboat is named the Zafir.
Yes.
Apparently, that's also mentioned in other catalogues.
Yes, it is the Zafir then.
Yeah, and just a point of clarification about the Malik. Apparently, the word Malik means king, I'm told.
No, this is Melik, M-E-L-I-K.
Oh, beg your pardon, not Malik.
No,
okay.
not Malik, it's Melik.
Melik, all right. Anyway, but
yes.
Apparently the gunboat was the Zafir.
Zafir, yes.
Right, I think actually... Sorry, go on, Richard.
There is, with these names, there's one called the Zafir, there's one called the Hafir, because that was used to transport part of the army up the Nile towards Omdurman.
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you for that. I think, as we've already said, the way that you presented it meant that we didn't really have too many questions because you'd covered most of the points that people were interested in. So thank you very much.
Mark, thank you.
Back to you, I believe, Peter.
Thank you very much, Mark. I thought that was absolutely splendid. And now I would like to call upon the Secretary, John Aitchison, to present a vote of thanks, please.
Yes, certainly, Peter. Well, Richard, an excellent display. You may recall that I first encountered your Sudan collection probably about 8 or 10 years ago when you lent a number of ephemera items to the Museum of the Royal, and I was laying them out in a display case when I managed to tear one of your maps right in front of you. But it appears you must have forgiven me for that because I'm doing the vote of thanks today. I find the camel postman stamps quite fascinating. The first one was 1897. On Richard's display, we saw that the last De La Rue one was in 1991, I believe. But I found out subsequently that, in fact, the last date on which a camel post stamp has been issued so far is 2003. So that means they've used the same design for 106 years to date so far. In Britain, we're very proud of the Machin series, which have lasted for 53 years, but that's literally only half the period that the camel postman stamps have been running for. We've seen some super stuff today: essays, die proofs, plate proofs, colour trials, artwork, some errors, archival appendix sheets. It would be impossible to see a better display of this subject matter than we've seen today. And for that, Richard, I'm sure that I've got everyone's support in thanking you unreservedly for a really wonderful display and a great afternoon's entertainment. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for your very kind words. They are much appreciated by me.
Just a moment, please, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry.
I'm just really here to round off the meeting, but there are one or two announcements that I would like to make. And first of all, I'd like to start by saying, if anybody has any feedback on this meeting and would like to make comments for the improvement of the presentation, I mean, not of Richard's presentation, but of the way in which we have undertaken the meeting and presented it to the members, perhaps you'd like to make your comments to a new RPSL email. It is rom@rpsl.org.uk. Now, some of you will have noticed that the London Philatelist has not arrived, I don't think yet, in the UK, which means, of course, that it certainly hasn't arrived in any of the other 25 countries from which our members are watching today. I spoke to the editor earlier. He tells me that the printers have had quite a lot of trouble with the COVID-19 causing reductions in staff and difficulties of that nature. But I am told, like the inimitable check, it is in the post. So you should, with luck, be receiving it early next week. The next, and he also said, the editor also said to me that he is very much open to some of the material that you're all writing up during this lockdown. Many of us are so lucky to be philatelists. I'm sure we're studying our stamps. I'm sure we want to write things up. And if you've got anything you want to say, whether it's a short article or a new discovery, or indeed a 16-page thesis, please send them in to lpeditor@rpsl.org.uk, and he will be delighted to review them with a view to publication. The next show, the next meeting of the Royal on this virtual process will be on Thursday, the 21st of May, 2020, at the same time, 1400 BST. And the show will be from the Vice President, Mike J.Y. Roberts, a very old friend from Ilkley. And the subject is the Pacific Steam Navigation Company. So I look forward to seeing you all again then, when, of course, the President will be in the chair. I think that's all I need to say, apart from the fact that the website has had a number of great improvements in the last few weeks. And we now have a new quick search facility, which is obtained by going onto the website and going to the home page and clicking on Library and Research, which will take you to a screen where there is a big Q up in the top right-hand corner. If you were to press that Q, you would discover not a person leaping out of 007, but a new page with some quick links to a number of very interesting places. If you log in as a member, you will see very much more than if you don't. But even if you don't, there are plenty of interesting things to look at. Now, if anyone would like to have a little bit of a run round of the website, Mark Bailey has offered to do that after this meeting is closed. But for the time being, may I thank Richard once again, our president. May I thank John for the vote of thanks. May I thank Mark and his standby, Mike Hoffman, and all of you for coming to watch and to enjoy together in this most extraordinary of times. God bless you all. Stay fit, stay well, and see you in 2 weeks. Goodbye.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. And I'd just like to make the point that Peter made, that if you want to find out more about the website, I'm going to keep the meeting open. Those people who want to stay for that, I'll take questions about the website. We'll look at it. But other than that, as Peter said, this brings us to the end of our meeting today. I'm going to unmute so everyone can say their goodbyes. Right. We can all say goodbyes, whatever we want to do.
Bye. 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 Bye.
Thank you very much.